Well, welcome to our third episode of BlueTube Live, and as you can see, there are a lot of yellow things in the woods, not too many blue, a little bit early. I was a bit worried that we wouldn't actually see much difference this week, and I am going to be proved wrong, I think. So, Tony Whitbread, here you are. What can you tell us about?
What can we see this week that we can't see last week? Well, I think maybe we're seeing things we missed last week. I don't know, but it's all much greener. It's all growing, and even I thought the daffodils would have died down a bit, but in fact they seem to be doing at least as well. But things are coming into flower as well. So just looking at a small patch, shall we go down here and have a look?
Okay.
Just even looking at a small patch by our feet, we find that the wood sorrel that I saw last week is actually now in flower. So that's the flower of the wood sorrel.
Oh, it's really pretty.
It's great. It looks like clover in the leaf, but it's nothing. It's not related to clover. It's actually It's in the oxalis family, and yeah, it's a sorrel, and this has come into flower since last week. This is a classic situation for wood sorrel. It grows on the humus on top of a log quite often, and these leaves. So I don't advise people to randomly graze in the countryside, but these leaves are edible, and they actually taste a little bit like apple peel. I shall prove it by eating it and then surviving later. If you crunch it up, it's got a nice kind of citrusy, apple peely type taste. Actually, it does taste like, the sort of sorrel you put in your salads. It tastes a bit like that.
Oh, so there we go. There's
nice.
An edible bit of the wood as well. And how common is sorrel like this?
Well, it's in woodlands again, mostly in ancient woodlands, and again in the kind of slightly acidic woodlands. But you do get it in all sorts of places, because most woods have this humic layer sitting on places, bits of dead leaves and so on, which become acidic anyway, and so that's where the wood sorrel sits. Reasonably common in ancient woodlands in the Weald. So yeah,
I did learn something last week, because I know that thing that looks like carrots there, carrot tops, is pignut.
Yeah.
And last week you said that that's possibly related to the nuts in May story.
Yeah, that's right. That was my little theory, which I hadn't looked up anywhere. So I thought, maybe it's to do with nuts in May, because there are no nuts in May. So that's ground nut. If you dig down, you can find a nut in the bottom there. So I thought maybe it's pignut. I thought. Then of course I looked it up, and it's got nothing to do with nuts, and it's got nothing to do with May. Here we go gathering nuts in May is actually from the children's song, and it actually means knots of May, and the knots means branches, and the May is another name for a hawthorn tree. So it's here we go gathering branches of hawthorn tree.
So even you, with all your knowledge of woods, can keep learning about things.
Absolutely.
But that's not one that we eat, is it?
That's not one well, you could eat it, but I wouldn't advise you to, because that family has all sorts of really deadly things in you wouldn't want to mess about with. It includes hemlock, for example.
Yes.
And the hemlock leaf looks a bit like that, but it's much bigger, but I still wouldn't randomly graze it.
Now, there's a lot of plants that look a bit like, I don't know, I'm such a novice, lilies of the valley or something, that sort of shape. These ones here.
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, that's as good as it gets. That's dog's mercury. So that's a different plant. And what's interesting about that is, it looks pretty ordinary, doesn't it, the plant itself, but it tells you a little bit about the soils. We're on the Weald here, where you've got a mixture of sandstones and clays, and they tend to be just on the acidic side of neutral. But dog's mercury likes it more alkaline. You get it carpeting the ground up on the downs, but here we see a little patch of dog's mercury. So what this indicates here is there's been a little bit of disturbance, a little bit of soil just bringing up the nutrients and changing that balance. Maybe a little bit of lime has got in here somehow. So by looking at the plants, you can read the soils. And here, in a generally clayey sort of landscape, you've got a little patch where there's some lime enrichment, and that's what the dog's mercury is telling you.
Fantastic. So, shall we take a little walk? I was hoping that I'd be able to see some comments, but I can't see them at the moment, and that might be the way that I've done this week. So, apologies if that's the case. I will find a way, possibly through my assistant, to look at the comments on Facebook, and we'll come back to you. So don't forget to ask your questions. Now, Tony's zooming in.
Right. Oh well. Again, something we saw last week, but it's bigger now, and you can actually see it better. Is this little one here? That's Townhall clock, or Moschatel. I can't see any actual flowers, but again, it's not exactly a giant of the forest. These little flowers which look like the face of a clock, a Townhall clock, and they're four facing flower heads, but they're only small, 2 or 3 millimetres at most. I thought I saw some in flower earlier, but can't see any here.
Now, how dependent on rain and water are these plants? Because it's very dry here at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, some of the plants in particular, they've evolved for spring wet soils. So we need spring wet soils, and it is unusually dry at the moment. And we were trying to think earlier about when it last rained, and it was quite a while ago, and it wasn't much. Pretty unusual for Sussex.
Now we were going to stop somewhere en route here, weren't we, Tony?
Yeah, what were we going to look at?
What we were going to look at.
There's a little bit of honeysuckle there. Again, that's not in flower yet. There it is.
And the bluebells are a long way off.
Yep.
Should we feel cheated on that?
There'll be another day. Bit more pignut here. And you can see what's also changing is you're getting the fresh leaves of wood sorrel just cropping up, and everything's small and everything's just coming out. A little bit of violet there. See those little tiny violet leaves?
Wow.
I'd expect them to be in flower actually. I don't know what they're hanging about for.
Will that be connected to the water, do you think?
I don't think so, no. I'm not sure why that's not in flower yet. I thought any problems from lack of water wouldn't appear until later in the year. The other thing we're seeing lots of is, everyone will know this, the lesser celendine. That's the leaf.
Why do you say everyone will
Everyone
know?
will know that.
Lesser celendine, everybody.
Yeah, you can't see the flower. I'll point one out if I see one.
I'm such an ignoramus, which is why I have Tony here, because last year I did this without him, and then he started joining in on Facebook, filling in my huge gaps in knowledge, and we've gone much better this year because we have him here in person, which is such a treat. Look at that lovely hollow there in the old piece of wood there with the spider's web. I bet some amazing invertebrates live in there.
Oh, those sorts of things are really important. Yeah, you're right. All sorts of invertebrates live in that sort of thing. If you get the big old hollow trees, of course, you start to get bats and owls. In fact, there's probably a lack of holes in wood in our modern woodlands because we tend to clear things like that up. So a bit of dead wood, a bit of rot hollows, that's good stuff.
So,
what else have we got here?
Is there a greater celandine? Asks Clarissa.
I think there is. I think there is something called a greater celandine, but it's not related to the lesser celandine. So I'll have to look it up when I get back.
Oh, Clarissa, you are going to catch him out, aren't you?
Oh, that's easily done. I think it's actually more of a thing of open landscapes. It's a bigger plant, obviously, being greater.
We'll get back to you next week on that. Oh.
Something else that's new this week. Lesser stitchwort. Has little white flowers when it comes out. It grows quite a bit bigger than that, obviously. Lesser stitchwort. Has all sorts of local names. I think my mum used to call it shirt buttons.
Why did she call it? Why is it called shirt buttons?
No idea. It looks nothing like a shirt button to me, but there we go.
Well, let's see if anybody here has got any names for lesser stitchwort. Whether they've got any traditional names for it.
More things coming out. That's wood veronica, what's veronica? Speedwell, wood speedwell, just coming out. It gets much bigger than that, but everything's really small at the moment.
See, again, I would just walk past all of this and have no idea whatsoever. Now, we're still seeing the daffodils, and they look very healthy, don't they?
They do, yeah. It's nice to see the native ones.
What's wrong? I mean, is there anything wrong with the non-native ones?
If we look at the flower here, this is a nice simple flower. A bee can get in there, get its nectar source, reward, and actually take the pollen away. Now, some of the domestic daffodils are bred to look showy, and they have kind of multiple flowers. So they're all kind of bunched up, and they're completely useless to the bee because the bee can't get in there. So it can try all it likes, but it can't actually get to the nectar, so therefore can't get to the pollen. So they're bred just for show, but when it comes to being a nectar source, they're useless. So they may look nice, but they're not really supporting our pollinators.
I mean, you can see as we're walking along, this wood is just packed with daffodils. But you couldn't grow native daffodils in your garden, could you?
I think you could do if you've got the legitimate seed sources. I've known people who are doing that. Certainly don't come into a wood and start gathering them here, obviously. But I think it is possible to get legitimate seed sources and grow them yourself.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So we have something else here.
Lesser celandine in flower.
Yes, so I have noticed this flower before in the woods, so that's the lesser celandine, which everybody knows, except for me. But I do now, so you can test me next week.
There's yeah, that looks like a strawberry, doesn't it?
Yes.
And it could have been wild strawberry, but it's not. It's Barren strawberry, which is in a different family, and the end of the leaf is blunter. So that's actually in the Potentilla family, like cinquefoil and tourmentils. That again has a little white flower, but that's Barren strawberry.
So we've got a lot of flowers to expect in this.
Oh yeah.
Then, haven't we?
And it should all be coming out. Oh look, another one.
Oh, there is a white flower.
There's a wood anemone.
Oh, how lovely.
A wood anemone is interesting because it's the slowest colonising of everything we've seen so far, so it really does show an ancient woodland, literally millimetres a year, so that's really good for an ancient woodland. Also, it only occurs on spring wet soils, so if you go into a wood that's ancient, you'll see this on the lower slopes, which are kind of in the soggy area, and then you gradually lose them and get more bluebells as you go up the slopes. So that's nice to see the wood anemone coming out.
Fantastic. Now, Mark, have we lost the video? Have you come back to us? I hope you have, because I think we've got fairly good signal this week, and Viv's just suggesting that you refresh your screen. But welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us this week. I've learnt a lot, and that wood anemone was just such a little treasure. There's no other ones.
No, just one or two. I mean, sometimes this time of year, maybe a week or two's time, the woods can look like snow. Get these complete carpets of wood anemone.
So it'll go from yellow to white soon, we hope.
It will, hopefully here, yes.
Depends on what comes here. Now we are walking, so that might affect the picture a little bit. And the reason why we're walking is we're going to have a look at the clearing that has been done, because there's been a lot of coppicing. And Tony's going to talk to us about some of the effects of coppicing, and also look at the age of the trees as we look at the rings on them. So there is a treat coming, but we just have to do a little bit of a walk first. And oh, wait a minute, I can spot something white here.
Can you? What's
Yes.
that? Ah, there we go.
Now, is that a wood anemone?
It is, yes. It's another wood anemone.
And you can see the leaf a bit more clearly on this one. Look. Here.
There's one just behind, a bigger leaf just behind it as well, just here.
Ah. I didn't realise that was it. That looks lighter than the one that's on it.
Yeah. And it's disobeying what I said, because as we're walking up the hill we're seeing more wood anemones. Maybe coincidence, because normally it's lower down. But it just means it's kind of soggy here in spring.
Well, it really stood out there, didn't it? Because it was so bright, the whiteness on there.
Yeah.
So we are coming now to, you're going to be surprised by this, because we've been in woodland like this, which is all, how old would you say, Tony, this wood?
Oh, I know, 8 or 9 years, something like that.
It's about 8 or 9 years growth, which is about right, because we were walking here about a decade ago, and it looked, it was cleared, I think, around that time. Now we're going to go across the path here, and we will see a huge difference. That looks quite scary.
It does look scary, doesn't it? And people can look at that and think, oh my God, the wood's destroyed. Yes, it's a big area, I admit, but actually this is the traditional way to manage woodlands. It's called coppice with standards. Now, coppice are all the relatively smaller trees which have been cut. You can see some of the old stalls or the stumps that are left behind. So that's the coppice. The ones left are the standards, or the bigger trees, or the timber trees. So the coppice is used for quick rotation stuff, and the bigger trees are used for timber, usually in construction, things like that. And it's been done for hundreds of years. And whereas it looks devastating, in fact, this is exactly the sort of cycle that many of our woodland flowers actually need. And it could be that we see well, it's almost certain, the reason we see so many daffodils and so many bluebells is because this is playing to their ecology. This is how they actually work. They need occasional openings, occasional periods of open canopy, so they can lay their resources down. So these great carpets of daffodils and bluebells are probably an artefact from management, a very nice artefact. If you go into some of our more near natural woodlands, some of our nature reserves for example, you do get those plants, but they're patchy. You don't get these carpets. So this is what creates those wonderful displays of spring flowering plants like bluebells and daffodils and wood anemones.
And what's left behind can tell a story as well, can't it?
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
We're going to talk about the rings on trees.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows if you look at the rings, you can count them and work out the age of the tree when it was cut down. These are actually quite old to be cut down when they were as coppice, because usually it's on a 10 or 20 year rotation. But if you look closely at the rings, some of them are a long way apart and some of them are closer together, and you can read how well the tree behaved, how well it grew. So this one, obviously, it grew very, very fast to start with and then started to slow down. And I guess the point here was, if you imagine when you cut an area, this is now completely open to the sky. The trees are going to grow like crazy because they've got lots of light. So they'll put on a lot of growth to start with. And then gradually as the canopy closes, they'll be competing with each other, and so the growth will slow down. So you can read all that. And sometimes, I can't really see it here, but sometimes you can see a few bad years. Say there's a drought for a few years, then you get the rings very close together. But you can go further, you can actually look on the different sides are different. So the rings are closer on this side than they are on that side. And that probably means that this side of the tree when it grew was in the shade, that side of the tree when it grew was more in the light. So you can start to see these sorts of things. You can tie it in with periods where there were insects defoliating the leaves or something, or as I say, periods of drought. So you can read a lot from these tree rings.
So is it all right that they're just staying here, that they're just stacked here?
In an ideal world, it would be nice for these coppice blocks to be smaller and for this to be taken away in the autumn. But it's probably far more important that it's actually done. And yeah, this is nice management. This is good.
And there's a big sort of stump over there, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, that's well, that's almost too big to be a coppice stool, because that's like it's been left for a long time before it was cut back. As I say, normally they're cut on something like a 10 or 20 year rotation. That must be something like 80 odd years, I guess. So you can almost, the things cut to the ground are called a coppice stool. A bit higher, they're called a stub. Higher still, and they're called a pollard. That means head height, as in pole.
Head height, as in pole.
As in poll tax.
Well, Linos, it's lovely to have you here, especially after yesterday's result. I'm sorry to mention it in the middle of nature. The Mark has rejoined us, and I'm just checking the comments because I wasn't seeing them on my live feed. So apologies if I didn't get back to you. Danielle, lovely, thank you so much. She's saying she's learning a lot. I learn a lot every time I come into the woods, and how lucky am I to be here with Tony at a safe distance, of course.
Obviously.
And I'm really surprised, Tony, how much you found this week. So what do you reckon? Should we try again next week?
I think we should try again, yeah, pretty regularly. We may see the same things over again. We've seen quite a range of woodland plants. There probably isn't a great deal more here, but you may find that the same things are looking even better next week. And hopefully we must start seeing the bluebells soon.
We'll have some plans to come up over the next few weeks of what we're going to do, and I think next week we're going to go a bit later so the churchgoers can join us as well. But I think for now that's it from BlueTube Live, from me and from...
Thank you very much for joining us, everybody.
Brilliant. See you soon. Thanks a lot.